The deluxe finals just happened and it was a Bavsargra mirror match. Let's take a look at the new Bavsargra ride line as well as the supporting cards that came in this set. I'll also be giving you some tips on how to pilot the deck as well as the sample deck lists at the end. Without further ado, let's get started. Starting with the ride line, for this deck specifically, you must play the starter Sealblaze Dragon Arhinsasir. Because when you ride a grade 1 Sealblaze Dragon Namakar Anui, you can Soul Blast 1 if you went first, search for either a Sealblaze Sword Diava or a Sealblaze Shield Bodhanaf. And if you went second, you search for both. Regardless of what these cards actually do, you're deck thinning by 1 to 2 cards on your first turn, and it's also an easy discard target for your ride line on the next turn. This just makes finding your Trick Moons and Very Lords more likely from searchers like Apara and Dvistia that only look at a limited number of cards from the top of the deck. The grade 2 Sealblaze Dragon Halabadra Ballot has the effect that when rolled upon by the new Bavsargra, counterblast 1 to search from deck up to 2 arms card with different card names and discard them. Then you can choose up to 1 arms from the drop and arm it to the Vanguard. Just as a refresher, arms are just like other normal orders that can be played from hand once per turn, and you can attach them to the side that's specifically written on the card for the unit. If we take a look at the shield, it says left deity arms for the new Bavsargra form, which means we can attach it to the right and it will stay there until we remove it by playing another arm of the same side. And we have cards like this new grade 2 that lets us bypass the rule of only playing one normal order a turn. And also, if we went first, this guarantees that we see the other missing arm that we did not search for. Before we talk about Bavsargra itself, let's take a look at the new arms. The shield can be armed for 1 counterblast, and when armed, draws us a card. And once per turn when our Vanguard is attacked, we can have it gain 10k power for that battle, or Soul Blast 1 to get 20k instead. This is a very powerful effect, since as long as you have Soul, this is an extra effect front you just have access to every turn. And if you can arm this more than once from your card effects, you're just drawing more cards without paying the counterblast. If we then take a look at the sword, Diava can also be armed for counterblast 1, and when it's armed, our Vanguard gets the skill of getting our front row units plus 5k until end of turn. And when Bavsargra attacks while being armed with this card, if the opponent is at grade 3 or greater, we gain an additional drive. But we must put this card to the drop at the end of the turn. The first effect is stackable, which means if we have 2 swords and we got to arm it on the same turn, we can give our front row 10k power. The extra power makes our first grade 3 turn much more threatening and we're less scared of our opponent damage checking a trigger. Let's now look at Sealblaze of Arbitration Bavsargra Aksaya. So this card is also treated as the old Bavsargra, which means we can use the old support that mentions the old name. Most importantly, we get to use the old arms. And once per turn, we can put a card from hand into Soul to arm our Vanguard with an arms from the drop. So this is another way we can arm our Vanguard multiple times in a turn, where we can swap weapons to meet the needs of the situation. Next, when our Vanguard is armed with 2 or more cards, Soul Blast 2 will retire all of the opponent's front row rear guards, and this unit gets an additional critical until end of the turn. And if no cards are retired this way, we get to draw a card. We're always getting some value out of our Soul Blast 2 other than the crit. It puts the opponent in a tough position. Do they want to commit to the board to then be retired, or do they want to give us an additional card? I think the most important skill has to be the next one. Once per turn when this unit is armed, energy charge 1 to card grade 1 or less card from the drop onto a rear guard circle. And if the chosen unit is a Very Lord, then we can overdress onto Trick Moon instead. This is how we get the countercharge effect to proc with Trick Moon. This basically refunds the counterblast that we use for Halabadra, and there are multiple cards in the deck that require CP, which is why it's important that we can call back a Trick Moon every turn to the center back row rear guard circle. The crit on the Vanguard is extremely threatening, especially when you pair it with the axe, making the opponent throw down an extra card even when they PG. With the additional crit already, they can't really let this attack through, as even just 1 extra crit on the drive check may end the game. And on top of that, if you have a triple drive with Diava, it just makes guarding this much more impossible. What I like to do is when I ride Bavsargra on top of Halabadra, I'll first equip the shield for the extra draw. Then I'll use Bavsargra's effect to arm the sword to bypass the counterblast 1 cost. And if I have a Very Lord, I'll then equip Vashtar to get the guard restrict, and at the end of the turn, using the axe's effect to arm back the shield. This is the ideal turn for me, but obviously this requires a lot of pieces and also a lot of counterblast, so you might not get the entire sequencing off, but some combination of this should be enough to put the opponent in a really tough spot. We also got a couple other supporting cards, and the main one being Sealblaze Dragon Yyugmashad. When it's placed on rear from hand, we can Energy Blast 3 and discard an arms card to draw 2 cards. And on top of that, it also gains 5k for the turn if the opponent is at grade 3 or greater. Just this skill alone makes this card viable. Because we already have so many ways to arm our Vanguard, drawing arms to then be able to turn them into other cards that we can potentially use is awesome. And don't forget, we have Cindi to get back an arm card for us to discard with Yyugmashad's skill. One thing you can do with this deck is constantly loop Cindi. If we manually call Cindi out, we can put it into Soul first to get back an arm. Then Bavsargra's Soul Blast skill allows us to get Cindi into the drop. Then when we equip a new arms and call out a Trick Moon, we have Cindi back on the field again. Yyugmashad also has a second skill where once per turn after our Vanguard Bavsargra attacks, we can CB1 to stand it. Bavsargra is finally not a 3 attack deck. Even though this does cost a counterblast, don't forget we have our Trick Moon. And honestly, from all the games that I have played, you never really extend out to 5 attacks. But still having the option is nice. Your second swing of Yyugmashad is often a lot larger than the first swing because of not just your drive checks, but also from the power accumulated from your Very Lord skill. The last new card that the deck got is Dancing Princess of Elegant Flames Faren. When it's put into soul by a card's ability and we have a Bavsargra Vanguard, we can give one of our units plus 5k power until end of the turn. It also has a skill that after this boosts a unit and our Vanguard is armed with 2 or more cards, we can Energy Blast 2 to return it to hand. I don't personally think this extra 5k is worth a spot in this deck. Even though we can give the power to Yyugmashad, I just prefer to have something like a Cindi or a Shenri in this spot. Shenri is another card that we can consider to put into this deck. Because we're soul blasting 2 every turn for Bavsargra's skill, if we still want leftover soul for bolt enough, having this as an insurance could be nice. And early on in the game, this is just an extra card to help find our pieces. And do remember that our arms are normal orders, which means Shenri should be active if we choose to play the arms from our hand. Other than the arms I already talked about, I also included the hammer, Surya in this deck. Sometimes we just need to get rid of problematic pieces in the back row. And the extra 10k power that it gives our Vanguard even after we replace this with Diava is great. Feel free to try out the other old arms to see what matches your playstyle the most. One thing you do want to watch out for is when your opponent denies you a CB going into turn 3, especially when you go first. Having at least one of each of the new arms available to you in the drop is extremely important, as your entire game plan revolves around having 2 arms equipped to use Bavsargra's skill. And here is the sample deck list. What do you guys think about the upgraded Bavsargra? Do you think it's a top meta contender, or was it just a fluke that this deck won? Personally, I really like the aggression that this deck provides, as well as how hard the Vanguard swing is to block. But I do think that as the meta develops, more decks will exploit the weaknesses of Bavsargra, like damage denying, and the deck desperately needing to find a lot of pieces to function. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, and I'll see you all next time.